Okay, hello everyone. Hope I'm audible. My name is Amit Nankuliar. I'm a professor in the organizational behavior area, and on behalf of research and publications team here at IIM Ahmedabad, we are pleased to have another interesting research workshop. We are having Professor Aditya Moses, who is an assistant professor in HRM area, and he actually works in impact of technology on human resource management and managing knowledge and knowledge workers. So we're delighted to have Aditya here. He will take you out. He will take you in terms of an interesting workshop and why do we need theory and what is theory building. And I hope you have a wonderful session ahead. So over to you, Aditya. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Amit. Thank you for that. Now, I don't know how interesting it will be, but I will try my best. Um, so, thank you for joining us. So, today's workshop is about theory development or theory building. Right? And let me put my biases in front. One, I am a researcher in HR and OB in no particular order. So most of my examples will come from there. I mainly work in my area. My favorite area is organizational theory. Very big bias. So I talk about more along the macro perspective. Again, some of my examples might come from there. And the final final bias that I have is I tend to favor certain scholars over others. One of whose work I am going to be extensively using for this session was Andrew Van der Van from University of Minnesota. All right. So that said, and now that you know my biases, let's get started. Also, I can see that a lot of you have joined from different places. Welcome. Those who have seen me before around campus and know about me or have met me, welcome to you as well. All right, so let's get started. Okay. All right, I hope you can see my screen. So the first, let me tell you what we are going to do today. So we are going to start with what does theory mean? What theory is not, and this comes a lot from my experience as a reviewer and having rejected papers and accepted papers, and also from my role as an author or a co-author. When I send papers and they get smashed by reviewers, you realize what theory is not. One is how do we build better theories, which is essentially how do we write about theoretical contributions, how do we actually develop our way of thinking, and finally I'll open it for some questions. All right. So before we start, I want to do a quick poll. Now I don't know if you have used this piece of technology before, but if you have not, please do now. All you have to do is go on to menti.com, put in the code, which is 23361781, and this question should come up. What comes to your mind? Sorry. What comes to your mind when you hear the word theory? That's all the question is. And you can answer whatever you like. So please do that now. Just go on to www.menti.com and use the code, and this question should come up. Okay, so we have statements, assumptions. Frameworks, okay. Literature review, okay. Phenomena, okay. Models, statements, interesting, okay. Explanation seems to be the most common. Okay. Previous research, I like that. Yeah. Okay. Causation, big word, group phenomena. Okay. So we're getting some prediction. All right. Language. All right. Okay. All right. So we have a pretty good understanding of what people think about it. Phenomena, logical explanation or explanation assumptions. Uh, a lot of different things are showing up, and I understand where they're coming from. Um, I also started off, or I still am, a phenomena driven researcher. And to me, phenomena used to be theory, and then I realized it's not. And I will talk about it in a brief moment. Um, but literature review, that is one of the most common things that I see or hear about is when I talk about theory, what does it mean? And people will say it means literature review, right? Uh, so let me, before going that, one of my professors at IIM Bangalore used to always start off with showing me this picture and saying, this is what theory is. It is like those blind men trying to figure out what an elephant actually looks like. So you're trying to figure out what it is or where it comes from. And the problem is that theory makes a lot of people uncomfortable. It maybe doesn't make you as uncomfortable, but a large number of people are uncomfortable because there are lots of misconceptions around this concept. And much of this misconception comes from the base or the assumption that management in general or social sciences in general are not science, they are an art. Just like in science, where we have certain laws or certain facts, theory doesn't really, in management, is not really precise, right? In the natural sciences, we have theory that has attained respectability because it gives you a precise description of how things are. But it also describes an ideal phenomena of how things work in a practical way. Think of any of your theories in physics or chemistry, and it works that way. A lot of people also think that scientists deal with fact, whereas philosophers delve into theory. This goes also for managers that we talk to, right? Who believe that fact and theory are two different things and they're not the same thing. To be very honest with you, I don't ever consider myself to be a philosopher. Now, theory in management, uh, believe it or not, has the same role as in any other field, whether it is biology, physics, chemistry, or psychology for that matter of fact. That is, it provides a general explanation and helps guide research. Now, so how do we define theory, right? So one of the best examples or definitions, though there are definitions of theory in sciences, etc. The best definition, according to me, has come from the work of Kerlinger, who says that a theory is a set of interrelated constructs or concepts, right? Definitions and propositions that present a systemic view of phenomena by specifying the relations among variables with the purpose of explaining and predicting phenomena. Somebody said language, which is very important because theory is a special language. It helps us understand some phenomena. But what is also more important is it is interrelated constructs that are coming through, right? So it's a special language when I say there is a theory around learning, or there's a theory around motivation, or there is a theory around um, uh, organizational citizenship behavior or institutional theory. We are talking about a special language, right? Just as with any other language, you also have vocabulary. In our case, the vocabulary is concepts or constructs, right? And the grammar that we use is the generalizations. That is the definitions and propositions that we are using. How are these constructs actually interrelated? Now, theories by their very nature are abstract, and they are not strictly true or false. And that is a little difficult when you are coming in from a science background. This used to hit me hard when I got in for my PhD, and I started realizing that I can explain one phenomena using multiple theories, which doesn't hold true in the sciences. But in our case, in social sciences, as I call it, theories are generally not true or false, but rather they are useful or not useful. The extent to which they are useful is if they are helping you generate explanations that help understand something more easily. Now, you might be able to apply multiple theories to the same phenomena. That is fine, right? But by very nature, we have very abstract and general theories, not very precise theories. Now, there are 2 or 3 things that I would like to talk about here. One is concepts or constructs, right? Concepts are essentially very abstract words, but these abstract words are given definitions, very specific definitions, which enable us to agree on the meaning of terms with each other, with others in our field. Words alone by themselves are not sufficient, right? So I would have a word for motivation, and everybody has to believe that this is what it is. So what we do is we need to know not only what the words mean, but also why and how they relate to each other. And that, in other words, we need to combine our concepts into some form of coherent generalizations that indicate the relationship or how 2 or more concepts are combined. Let me give you an example. So one of the classic examples in organizational theory is division of labor. So division of labor is supposed to produce specialization, and specialization creates expertise. That is the general theory, right? Now you would notice that when I make these 2 generalizations, each indicate that there is a relationship between 2 concepts. The first one is division of labor creates specialization, specialization creates expertise. So there is a relationship that is being created. And together, when we create this, it yields some kind of explanation of how expertise can be developed in organization. So for example, if you want, how do I develop expertise? The answer would be by creating specializations. And how do you create division of labor? Right? In brief, theories provide explanations. They provide a coherent and connected story about why acts, events, and behavior occur. Now, this comes a lot from the work of Higgins and McKinley. I will try to give you a resource dump at the end, if time permits. Now, you would notice that there are a couple of things that are very key here. One is the concept and construct. The other is assumptions and generalizations. So let me discuss this in a little detail. So there are some key components of theory. One is concepts or constructs. One is assumptions and generalizations. Now, unfortunately or fortunately, I don't know, but the concept and construct are often used interchangeably. As a sociologist or as somebody who likes sociology, we often refer to something as a concept, whereas psychologists, and I'm dragging Amit into here, like Amit use the term constructs. Both refer to the term that has been given an abstract generalized meaning. A few examples of in sociology of concepts are things like status, social system, stratification, social structure, culture, right? In psychology, if you talk about constructs, you would have things like motivation, ego, hostility, personality, intelligence. Now there are few advantages of defining theoretical constructs. First, theories, researchers, and practitioners can agree on the meaning. And the second, the abstract nature of them enhances the development of generalization. So it helps. But remember this, whenever we are talking in a paper or in any kind of research, when you're using these concepts or these constructs, though they mean the same thing, but they have a meaning which is commonly understood. You need to use those. You cannot just simply say, I'm going to define it in my own way. The first question that you will be asked for sure is, why did you define it in this way when there's already a definition for it, right? Now, how do you actually define a concept or a construct? First, uh, it is defined in terms of words, right? So I'm giving you an example. We have a concept or a construct called citizenship behavior, which is defined as the degree to which a person displays pro-social behavior at the workplace due to satisfaction. That is, citizenship behavior is defined in terms of satisfaction at work. Another term that we believe will bring more clarity to this concept is dissatisfaction, right? How does it occur? So we are using two different words and we are using words in this. But now words are just one way of understanding it. You need to also, as a researcher, you also need to understand or define this term in measurable, this concept in measurable terms. And that is what we call an operational definition. That is, how do you actually measure this construct or this concept? Now, in the case of citizenship behavior, it is very easy. There is a scale, but suppose you don't have a scale. So it's pro-social behavior, right? Due to satisfaction. So you might measure it as the amount of volunteering or the activities, the number of activities that a person is volunteering for in the organization. Now, this definition by essence is limited, clear, and concise. Each construct is measured or operationalized in a certain way. Operationalizations are not constructs. So when you're using a scale to measure something, it is not a construct. It is just a variable. But multiple variables might come together to create a concept or a construct. I'm not getting into details of it right now, but there are concepts that we measure which cannot be observed. Those, what in terms of measurement we call latent variables, right? Variables that cannot be measured. So we use scales and we try to measure things that cannot be seen using concepts and constructs that are observable. And we create this new kind of construct. The other thing that is there in theory is assumptions and generalizations. Now, the assumption is a statement that is taken for granted or accepted as true, right? Assumptions are usually accepted without proof. Let me give you an example. So, for example, an assumption might be there is no one best way to teach people. And you can also make an assumption that all ways of teaching are not equally effective. Now, the first assumption challenges the conventional idea that there are universal principles for effective teaching, regardless of time or place. The second assumption challenges the notion that the complexity of teaching makes it futile to seek guiding principles. Now, consider a third assumption. The best way to teach depends on the nature of the teaching task. Now, what are we doing? The third assumption that we have made in this case that effective teaching is conditional. It depends on the nature of the teaching task. All these assumptions have been accepted as reasonably true in different by various groups of people, I mean researchers. In fact, there is evidence that all three assumptions might lead to an explanation of effective teaching in literature, right? What we call literature. So a generalization is different from assumptions. A generalization is a statement or a proposition that indicates the relation of two or more concepts or constructs. In other words, a generalization links concepts in a meaningful way. Many kinds of generalizations are found in theoretical formulations. Now, to give you a brief rundown again, right? Assumptions are generalizations only if they specify the relationship among two or more concepts. Hypotheses that we generate are generalizations, but with limited support, because we are trying to identify how X leads to Y or how X influences Y or whatever it might be. Principles that we spoke about or you spoke about are generalization, but with substantial empirical support. So there are certain theories in management which do have certain principles. For example, conservation of resources is a theory that we use, which does have certain principles. You have the service dominant logic literature or the institutional logic literature, which has, again, sorry, but my OT bias, which comes through, which has certain principles. Now, there are also something which we call laws. We generally don't have laws in social studies or social sciences, but still, laws are there. Laws are generalizations which have overwhelming support, right? There are very few laws in social science, but consider, for example, in the case of economics, there is a law of supply and demand, which is essentially a law. So assumptions and generalizations are different. Assumptions are considered to be true. Generalizations are telling you the relationship between two or more constructs, which will be true in the case of hypotheses with limited support, if it holds, obviously. Principles with a little more support, and laws if there is everybody agrees to it and there is overwhelming support. Now, the basic form of knowledge in any of our fields is more or less similar. It consists of concepts or constructs, generalizations, which all build towards a theory. Each is dependent on the preceding. So if you think of it as in terms of science, right? So if you think of it, the concepts and the constructs are actually atoms. Atoms come together in some form to create what are called molecules, which are your generalizations. Now, these molecules will come together to create some element, right, which is your theory. So water doesn't become H2O just because hydrogen and oxygen have to mix in some way. Now, the way you can think about it is concepts are logically consistent. Concepts are linked together to form some kind of general explanation. That in turn will form a logically consistent set of propositions, providing a general explanation of a phenomenon. The theory is then empirically checked. Now, empirically doesn't mean quantitatively. Empirically means it can be checked qualitatively or quantitatively. Right? And you test it, you might do hypothesis testing, you might do proposition development, and you deduce something from the theory. The results of the research then provide the data for either accepting, rejecting, or reformulating or refining and clarifying the basic generalizations of it. Over time, with continued empirical support and evidence, the generalizations develop into principles that explain the phenomenon. In the case of organizational theory, for example, principles are developed to explain the structure and dynamics of organization. and the role of an individual in organizations. Theory is both the beginning and the end of any scientific research. It serves as the basis for generating hypotheses to test propositions that explain observable empirical phenomena. But in the end, it also provides explanations or general explanations and knowledge. So the question that arises is, how do I build a good theory, right? So before we get into that, let me first explain what theory is not. First things first, theory is not references. Usually, when I'm reviewing a paper, I get a list, a laundry list of references. So and so said so and so, so and so said so and so, so and so said so and so. And I am saying no idea. So that is not theory. That is just a list of references and papers that you may or may not have read. You might have read the abstract, I don't know, right? But that is not theory. Theory is not stating what has been already done by somebody else. Theory is not data. Definitely not data. Theory is not a list of variables or constructs. A laundry list of either of these is just not applicable. Right? It doesn't make any sense. Diagrams that a lot of people use, hypotheses or predictions without any backing are again not theory. Phenomena by itself is not a theory. You might argue that, hey, phenomena is theory. No, it's not. The phenomena is a phenomena. If you can explain it in generalized terms and either expand theory or provide a new theory, then it is theory. Otherwise, it's just a phenomenon. And the final one is frameworks. Now, this is one of my pet peeves when I'm reviewing a paper. I see a paper and the first thing that is shown to me is a framework. Now, the first question that comes to my mind as a PhD scholar is, where did this framework come from? Right? It must have come from somebody's theoretical development. Now, a framework is just basically, if you're using a framework just by itself, not a framework that you have developed, right, is basically pulling somebody's work and showing that this is the framework, I'm going to test it in so and so context. That is not theory. You're just testing it in a different context. I cannot tell you, and I cannot emphasize this enough, that phenomena and frameworks, to a large extent, this comes about here, right? Is the number of times I have had to reject papers because the motivation of the paper is XYZ phenomena has been studied using so and so theory in Western part of the world, and I am testing it in India. So that is not, I don't see we don't see the theoretical contribution in that. What are you doing for theory? Yes, if you make an argument saying that, look, this phenomena does not hold, or this theory may not hold in India because of XYZ reason, then I can see some theoretical contribution. If you're just testing it and getting the same results, just the context is different, it is not a theoretical contribution. I'm being sorry if I'm brutally honest, but that is the truth. Now, the other thing that I often see, and I don't know how to put it in other words, is using a theory without understanding the basis or the assumptions of that theory. Just applying it or putting that word there, saying that I am going to use XYZ theory, and then not going into details of that theory, not really reading and understanding what that theory means, is a big problem. References is one of the biggest issues why papers are rejected. Theoretical contribution is not a list of all the papers you have read. And he said that, she said that. And this is generally comes from this philosophy that a lot of us, including me, had when we started off, which said, identify a research gap. That research gap is basically something that people have not seen, or which is written in future research directions that people can take, and I start writing about it. One of my favorite professors said this in Hindi, but I'll translate it in English, is there are only two reasons why there is a research gap that exists. One, it is not interesting. Two, it is very difficult to measure. It's either one of these. Identifying a research gap from literature and saying, I am going to write about it. The first question that is answered, that people will ask you is why, or so what? There must be a reason why people have not attempted it for so far, right? I mean, come on, think about it. There are thousands of PhD students around the world. Some of them might be following the same ideas as you. Why do you think they are not addressing the research gap? It's not because of references, because you're not making a theoretical contribution. He said, she said is not here. And this is a laundry list of things that go wrong when you write a theoretical or any paper where you're trying to make, especially in management, the main important thing is making a theoretical contribution. Now, let me give you an example here of what you can potentially do, right? So I was doing a paper, or I am doing a paper, which is under review, which is on the gig economy. Now, I'm using JCM, which is a very well used theory in OB and HR, which is job characteristics model, right? Old theory, new context, what's new, right? Well, I'm trying to prove, or I'm trying to make a theoretical contribution by saying that JCM does not hold in the gig economy. If I just say that much, it is only about the data. It is still not a theoretical contribution. I need to explain why JCM doesn't hold in this context. Then it is a theoretical contribution, because I'm furthering the boundaries of JCM as a theory, right? So think about this in instance. One of the best papers that you can read is, and if you have not, I'm sure some of you have, but if you have not, there's a paper by Sutton which is called What Theory Is Not, which was published in ASQ a long time back. I think it still holds for what it's worth. It's one of the best papers you can read. Have a read if you want. He explains these concepts in more detail on what theory is, what theory is not, especially data. Unfortunately, I see a lot of papers, especially from Indian scholars, who collect panel data, put regressions and send it to me. I mean, not to me, I get it as a reviewer, and the data is unique. Fine, the data is unique, but that does not imply anything to theoretical contribution. It is method. It is not theory, right? Nitesh, you want? Okay, go ahead, Nitesh.
Yeah, hi. I'll keep it short.
Sure.
So basically, I just wrote a term paper, finished writing a term paper yesterday. What I've done is I'm trying to connect managerial cognition to understand the effect of meaningful work on managerial cognition. So the way I went about it is I used two models of meaningful work, and I connected them to. I drew conclusions to two models of managerial cognition.
Okay.
And I used some 2-3 theoretical lenses, like SDT and agency theory and so on. So
okay.
Would that be considered like a theoretical contribution, or basically
good
set of propositions were developed? Yeah.
Okay, good question. I don't know why my screen has gone green. Okay, never mind. Okay, Nitesh, I'm first. Okay, so to those who I should say this, I know Nitesh since ages, but the other question is, the point is, that's a good question, Nitesh, and I'm going to come up to one of the ways in which theoretical contributions can be made. And what you're suggesting is something that we call using paradoxes. Okay, yeah. So I will come up to it, and I think I will be able to answer your question in maybe a couple of slides. All right.
Yeah. Thank you.
All right. No problems. All right. So if this is what theory is not, then what is theory, right? So think of it this way. On the left hand side, you have phenomena. I have just given some examples of phenomena because I couldn't think of others. For example, corporate fraud or open innovation as a context, right? Or CSR, corporate social, or scaling up, extinction. And on the right, you have, on the right top hand side, you have different theories that you might have heard of. Resource-based view, resource dependence theory, institutional logics, population ecology, self-determination theory, right? All these are theories. Essentially, what you're trying to do is trying to fit into a box. You can use RBV and M&A. You can use RBV for open innovation. You can use RBV for high attrition. You can use RBV for corporate fraud, whatever it might be. Your job as a researcher is if you're phenomena driven or are you theory driven. If you're theory driven, you are on the columns, and then you use different theories, or you can use different, you can use the same theory to explain different phenomena. If you are a phenomena driven researcher, you are in the rows. So identify your row. And can you use different theories? I'm just giving you, this is just an example. You have multiple other theories that I have not even spoken about here, right? And you have different theories that you can use. Generally, this is like a matrix. You identify whether you, and you try to fit in things. Now, some of these theories you may have heard of, some of them not, obviously, but as I said, I am more biased towards OB and HR, so that's why. Okay, now I know about this, right? I can make sense of this, but let me. What makes a good theoretical contribution? Well, the first thing is what and how. What makes a good theoretical contribution is what and how, right? In principle, it is possible to make any important theoretical contribution by simply adding, subtracting some factor of what from an existing model. Think of any model or any theory that you know of, and you're adding something. For example, RBV, we know that there is one element called VRIN, and there is work right now which talks about how I and N in VRIN are actually opposing each other, right? So I just add or delete it. I'm making a theoretical contribution. But this process by itself very seldom will satisfy any reviewer. Additions, deletions are typically proposed are not of sufficient, either they are not of sufficient magnitude to change the core or logic of the existing model. Now, how do we justify this? That's how comes in. So just as a list of variables does not constitute a theory, addition of a new variable to an existing list or subtraction of a variable from an existing list does not constitute a theory. What is important is how, which is relationship, right? So theory is not about lists, it's about relationship. So how is this new variable changing the core assumptions that we have? How is this removal of this? So for example, just like the example I gave you earlier, if I just explain or just say that, hey, JCM does not hold in the gig context, minus all these, okay, it doesn't work. I need to explain how. Why does it not work? How, what is going wrong or what is changing because of why it is happening? Okay. The second question after what and how is why. Now, why is probably, the most fruitful, but also the most difficult avenue when it comes to theory development. It commonly involves borrowing from a perspective from other fields, which encourages altering how we think about things, how our metaphors are, challenging the underlying rationales, supporting. This is a very profound thing of why, and it's very difficult to do, right? this profound challenge, it's a challenge, profound challenge to our views of, let's say, human nature or group development, organizational transactions. They have been used, they have been done beautifully, right? Now, I don't know if you have heard of this. So generally, when we talk about population ecology, it comes from the work, I'm very sure you have heard of it, from the work of ecology, which is by Darwin, survival of the fittest. Similarly, evolutionary theories. There's also one evolutionary theory which I like, which is about organizational change, and which says that it is not a cycle, but it's in Lamarckian evolution. Lamarckian evolution basically means that it's in spurts. So it's stable for some time, then you have sudden spike of changes, then it's stable for some time, right? Um, and you have certain theories that are really revolutionary. For example, you have work on organizational elasticity, which comes from the concept of elasticity. More recently, one of my co-authors has done some work around innovation, but rather than just saying innovation and what we know as incremental innovation or radical innovation, he talks about the pace, the rhythm pace of innovation, which comes from physics, right? So sometimes to challenge existing theories, we draw on literature from other fields. Now, this is again very tough to do. I have to be very honest, it's extremely tough to do at certain points in time. But it also makes one of the most important or easy ways of doing some kind of theoretical contribution. All right. Okay. So, like I said, what makes a good theory? First is what and how. So, what is basically what all is changing? Is it just a variable? No. So it can't be what, comma, how. It's what and how go together. So you have to do both of these things together. Then the second question is why. Why is it changing? How does it change? What can you bring in that will make it change? And then you can also add things like who, when, and where. That is, contexts are often used to make some kind of changes in our theory or our theoretical contributions. Now, generally, what happens is when we build some theory, we do some kind of context dependent, phenomena dependent studies as well. Now, if you remember from previous slides before, theory is used to give explanations of certain phenomena. When you have a phenomena which is not going as per the theory, that's where who, when, and where can come. So there is some role of context. How does that help in theoretical contribution? Well, if you think of it as a circle, basically what we are trying to do is push the boundaries of the circle, trying to make it a little more bigger. When you're talking about certain phenomena or in certain specific contexts, when things are changing, why a theory holds or why variables are coming in or why variables are going out, what you're trying to do is push the boundaries of a theory. You're saying that, hey, the assumptions hold, but the assumptions have contingencies on it, which is similar to any science, to be very honest. There's another way in which you can build theories. And so I'm going to talk about three ways. First is via paradox. That is, look for theoretical tensions or oppositions and use them to stimulate the development of more encompassing theory. This is one of the most commonly used methods. You might have study A and study A, right? Both use different theories. Both theories are in opposition to each other, and you're trying to say, I'm going to look at what works. Now, there are multiple ways in which you can use paradox. First, let's first think of it this way. Let's imagine there are two opposing theses, A and B, two opposing theories, A and B, right? They might be related. They might not be related. They might be related in some way, but they are both opposing. Now we can do a couple of things. First, we can keep A and B separate, and their contrasts, and we see the contrast that happen because of it, and we appreciate it and say that whatever is happening, A is explaining this phenomena in this way, B is explaining it in this way. This is what A would suggest, this is what B would suggest, and we go ahead and do. The second way is we can situate A and B at different levels or different locations in the social world. For example, you might use A and B as micro and macro levels. To give you a simple example, there is a theory that was developed by Crossan on organizational learning, which is what we call multi-level theory. So they use the motivational theory, which is SDT, and they use goal setting. And to those who are a little initiated, both these theories are not really well, they are complementary, but they have opposing assumptions if you read the theory properly. But they use both to develop a model in such a way that they are used at different levels. Now, there are also papers that I don't know if you have read. There are papers which look at CSR from different lenses. So most CSR studies are looked at from the stakeholder lens. There's a paper in JBE. I forgot the author's name just suddenly. Okay, which looks at CSR from the point of view of principal or agency theory, from stakeholder theory, and from another theory. And then they try to make an resource dependence theory. And they try to make an argument that which of these theories explains this behavior of organizations better. That is one way of doing your work, right? The second way is obviously we can situate it at different levels. The third way, we can separate both A and B temporarily at the same place, right? And the final or the fourth one is we can find some new perspective which eliminates A and B. Yes, Vivek.
Hi, Aditya. So when we are kind of using these opposing theories, like maybe say stewardship and agency, which are completely opposite, sometimes the problem is how do you then kind of take the hypothesis one way, because it's a horse race? How do you finally go one way? And what I hear, competing hypothesis not to encourage mostly.
Why are you going one way?
Because both have opposite, and finally you need to frame the hypothesis. Like if it's a competing hypothesis, then also there is a pushback that it's
no. So it depends on which call you're taking, right? Are you saying that theory A is better than theory B? If you don't want to take that as better, A is better than B, and you want to say that, hey, I'm going to use A. So you develop an hypothesis, let's say H1A, and you say B also is used, so H1B, and then you would just test for both hypotheses. As simple as that. I mean, there are papers in top journals which do that. So it is, I'll tell you where the problem comes. The problem comes because of two assumptions. One, we have to give one hypothesis based on one theory. That is true. You generally use one theory when developing a paper. But if you are using this kind of paradox approach, you have to do justice to both theories, both theory A and theory B. It can't be one is weaker than the other. You can actually do H1A and H1B. In fact, I have done it for a couple of my papers, and reviewers are quite happy to accept it. And obviously, see, it's hypothesis, right? It's not proven true. And then you make an argument saying that H1A held and H1B didn't held, and this is whatever it is. That's just one way of doing it. All right. There's one more way, which is probably the toughest, which is, can you find a way in which you can eliminate the opposition between A and B, which is much tougher. Right?
And nowadays, Aditya, there is also a kind of a like reviewers also want us to show the mechanism, which becomes tough if we are choosing two theories. They just don't want you to tell the mechanism, like show us some kind of a.
You're talking about the method, right?
Yeah.
Again, it's the method. So this is what the problem happens, right? Let's imagine you are talking about, I don't know, motivation. Okay. And generally, what is observed, or what we do as researchers or scholars, is we say so and so is leading to motivation, but we have not measured it, right? And we are making this huge assumption that it leads to some kind of motivation, intrinsic, extrinsic, whatever, pay for performance, or some kind of, to give. Okay, one of my pet peeves with HR, right? So the argument that HR professionals will give me is, we do all these cultural events so that it increases engagement, but they have not measured engagement, right? Nor am I giving you a theory. Remember, is about relationships. So when I'm talking about relationships, I'm saying if A, which is a construct, how does construct A lead to construct B, is basically the relationship. So if I'm not telling you how the relationship is, which is basically mechanism, that's a problem. In terms of method, it is extremely important to show a method. To show a mechanism. Without showing the mechanism, your paper becomes suspect, to be very honest with you. I also learned this the hard way, but then I realized why they're asking for it, because they want to see whether A leads to B. Actually. Okay, so moving on. So that's one way, paradox. Again, paradox might look very enticing, but paradox is also like mixed methods. Is good to look at, is very tough to do. Or a good mixed method is very tough to do. All this, the same way, doing paradox is very tough to do. So Nitesh, if this is essentially what you're trying to do, is basically looking for paradoxes. And if you're trying to say that, hey, theory A explains managerial cognition, theory B also explains managerial cognition, but they are opposing, I'm going to look at managerial cognition in both ways and appreciate both A and B. And then we will see what happens. Right. Okay. Now, Eisenhardt is the queen of case studies, and she has made some great, I have used case studies, but it can be also qualitative studies in general, right? So there are sometimes paradoxes which are not, there are phenomena which don't have an explanation. We don't have a theory that explains something. And in those cases, we need to build theory. Now, one way of building theory is case studies. Another way is using a qualitative method, which helps you build a new theory. But remember one thing, a new theory is piggybacks on the back of some other theory or some other concept. It can't be, it cannot be just out of the blue, I'm going to make a new theory. It doesn't work that way. So you generally need to use some form of theory or some basic form of information from literature which will suggest some new things. Now, the beauty of any qualitative method is it develops an existing theory. That said, there are too many papers that I see which are qualitative but are not properly done. If you have not read this paper, please read the paper called Sense Making and Sense Giving by Dennis Gioia and co-authors, and AMJ, if I remember right. And there's a whole method which we call the Gioia method, Gioia, Gioia method, which is basically how you should do a grounded theory. When you're talking about theory development, or you're trying to explain a phenomena and your argument is that this is exploratory, nobody has seen this, there is some indication from X and Y, X theory, but really doesn't explain the phenomena completely, so that's why I'm going to use it. You should be using something like a grounded theory method, which creates what in OT we call mid-level theories. That is, theories that are not really macro, but are more towards societal level or organizational level. Using something like thematic analysis is not appropriate in this case. the argument is thematic analysis is basically done with a lot of a priori codes existing. If there are a priori codes already existing, then why are you doing an exploratory study? What is your theoretical contribution is the first thing that will be asked. You need to understand that qualitative work really helps in building theory, but good qualitative work does. There is too many examples of bad theoretical work, bad qualitative work. One of the simpler ways of doing qualitative work is using case studies. Now, obviously, there are multiple views on this. Some people will strongly argue about the single case, in-depth single case study method. And there are some who would follow the Kathleen Eisenhardt model of multiple case study method. I am a believer personally, you don't have to do it, but personally, I am a believer of the multiple case method. So if I can explain phenomena occurring across multiple organizations or multiple units of analysis, using multiple cases, showing contrast and contrast between them, comparing things, and that I believe will only adds to theory development. So again, if you're from the Eisenhardt school, multiple cases. A single case also does help. There are examples of a single case study which have really developed theory in particular domain. And the final one comes from Andrew van der Ven, which I am a very big believer in, which is disciplined imagination. Now, theories are often challenged because they are not able to explain something. Now, there is an idea here that we can borrow from other fields. We can borrow from other theories, not in our field, and make something. But the importance of what Van der Ven says is disciplined imagination, right? Disciplined imagination is basically following an ecological perspective where you search for multiple theories, you identify certain of them, you apply them. Those who don't fit in, you throw them out and you modify your theories. But it is a disciplined kind of approach, right? See, whenever we are as theorists, whenever we build theory, we design, we conduct and interpret very imaginary experiments all in our head. In doing so, what we are doing is we are basically doing the three processes of evolution: variation, selection, and retention. Variation is identifying different theories, different concepts and constructs from different theories. Selection is we identify ones that fit in, and the final one is retention. So we only retain the concepts that fit into our theory and throw out the rest. Now, because as a theorist, the nature actually intentionally guides us into some kind of evolutionary process. Theorizing is more like artificial selection compared to natural selection, obviously. And theorizing becomes more like natural selection the more the process is dominated by validation and empirics. So as you go ahead, what I'm essentially trying to say is the first part where you are talking about variation, right? Or selection, more to be honest with you, is not natural selection. It is more like artificial, because we are intentionally selecting certain theories. But the final part, which is retention, will become more dominated only if you find evidence. Now, this disciplined imagination is actually something that you can practice yourself in the form of thought experiments, or by conducting your own way of doing, using multiple theories, trying to apply multiple lenses to the same phenomena and seeing if it fits. You can also borrow from other fields. Just a word of caution: when you borrow from other fields, borrow theories that have clear, precise definitions. If you're trying to borrow from fields, if you're trying to borrow a theory which does not have clear, precise definitions, it becomes much more difficult to apply it to your own context. That is when problems will start occurring, when you have multiple competing explanations for something, right? So this is how you would generally build theory. Now, some things that I need to talk about is when you're applying an old model to a new setting and showing that it works. By itself, that is not instructive, that is not theory, right? So what you need to do, it will have only merit if the new setting suggests that the theory shouldn't work or shouldn't work under these conditions. In other words, if you're going to, it's always preferable to investigate qualitative changes in the boundary of a theory, what we call boundary spanning, right? Rather than quantitative expansions. It's always, when you want to expand a theory, sometimes qualitative is better than quantitative. So I don't know if you have read Wheaton's work, but Wheaton in 1980s talked about growth-oriented organizational theories. And his specific argument was under the conditions of decline. So sometimes using that helps. In case studies, there is one more thing that I forgot to mention, which I should, which is basically that sometimes testing or trying to figure out something in extreme conditions is very helpful. That really leads to theory development because you are testing at the extremities. Let me give you an example. So there is a lot of work around organizational learning and all that, which has been set around teams that work in high pressure situations, whether it is doctors in the ICU or it is some form of commando unit in the military or something along those lines. And the idea behind that is that helps you create some kind of boundary saying, hey, even in these extreme conditions, this holds and this does not hold, and or these needs to be added. Some things that help me or helped me in my journey is asking questions. When you read any paper, whether it is an AMJ or an ASQ or an SMJ or a journal of management or a journal of, I don't know, strategic management journal or some other journal, which is an FT50, don't buy it for face value. Do not buy it for face value. Just, oh yeah, it's been published in an FT40. That doesn't mean anything. Okay. Obviously it means a lot, but not in that scenario. What I'm trying to say is read it for what it is trying to say. See where the theoretical contributions for a paper come from, right? The second thing that always helps is asking the question, why should somebody publish this? Now, I'll give you an example. If you're looking at, let's say, for example, if you're looking at one of my areas of work is inclusion. So if I'm going to write about inclusion specifically, more specifically, I do some work around LGBTQ inclusion in India. Now, that context might be interesting to you or I, right? But to a reviewer, it will be, and so what? This has been done before. What is it new? Why should you publish it? That's where, so I will explain in that condition. I can explain what and how, but am I explaining why, who, when, where, right? So how do I bring things about? So maybe by showing or saying that, let's take an example of, hey, LGBTQ inclusion in India is not a function of, let's say, if I'm using institutional logics as a theory, I am going to argue, or institutional theory per se, my argument could be, it is not about institutions, is not about mimetic isomorphism, it is about institutional entrepreneurs, for example. Okay, just a thought experiment. where we can talk about how employee activism leads to more inclusion or less activism. What you're trying to do is, all this is called disciplined imagination. That is probably one of the easiest ways, but takes time to develop as a habit. So think through whenever you write a paper. Whenever you write some kind of theoretical contribution, relook at it and say, hey, what deserves, what in this paper is so deserving that it needs to be published? Is it something that is new, or is it, am I using an old model in a new setting? Think about it that way, right? Also, that said, and I cannot emphasize this enough, there is a reason why you need to go back and read papers that actually originated the theories. What ends up happening is, over a period of time, different scholars take the same idea but start improvising on it, and you start getting different definitions, different ways of operationalizing the same story, right? And coming up with the same things. And what ends up happening is, what the original assumptions were and what the assumptions in now are completely different. So go back and read whatever theory or wherever you think it started from. Doesn't mean that you go and read, you know, the seminal work of somebody. But for example, if you're going to read, let's say, RBV, you should be reading Jay Barney's work. I'm not going back to Penrose, but you should be reading Jay Barney's work. If you are going to use institutional theory, you need to read the original papers on institutional theory. If you are going to be using something on SDT, you need to be using Decky and Ryan's work on SDT, or self-determination theory, right? And that will lead you to doing something called disciplined imagination. As a PhD scholar, which I assume a large number of you are, disciplined imagination is probably one of the best ways in which you can do theory development. It takes time, but it also increases how you can do things. It increases your capacity to do theory development. And finally, if there is one thing that really helps in theory development, it is being critical of, it is being able to review a paper. So sign up and become reviewers for AOM conference or other conferences. And it's very rare for a PhD student, especially from India, to become a reviewer for a journal. But still, you can easily become a reviewer for AOM, or you can become a reviewer for EGOS, or whichever is the conference from your area. And it helps you. It helps you a lot because they give you an idea of what you want to look at, how you look at things, what needs to be done. Finally, some resources. So AMJ published or continues to, I don't know if they, not in the recent past, but they have published a series of papers on how to publish in AMJ. AMR has a whole series of papers on what is theoretical contribution, how to do theoretical contribution. ASQ has a set of papers on what is theory development, how to be, what theory is not, how do we look at theory, what is a framework, what is a, how is it different from a theory. Now, that said, let me go back to some of the questions or some of the points, not points, some of the words you had used, right? Frameworks. We have not really spoken about frameworks. And if you remember, I said frameworks are not theory, but frameworks are a good way of explaining how you are adding to theory. Frameworks are developed, right? Frameworks are generally developed by a person. Now, when you're trying to develop a framework, what you're trying to do is you're trying to say that, hey, theory X or theory, let's say theory X under certain phenomena, which comes here, holds or displays a different relationship. Now that is theory development. But you're using frameworks, you're creating a new framework to explain something new. It can't be the other way around, that I'm using a framework that exists and trying to it fits exactly into my phenomena and I'm going to test it, that is not theoretical development. That is just old wine in a new bottle, right? Um, before I jump to the questions, and I'm leaving it open a little longer for questions because I would like to answer questions, whatever they might be, is using theories from other fields. Especially be careful when you're using theories which may be very Indianized. If you cannot explain it clearly, there's a problem. Does that mean we shouldn't use it? No, it means you should use it, but you should be able to back it up by explaining it properly. Now, too many times, including my own paper, we suffer from the problem that most of our journals are US based, and AEs and reviewers don't understand a word of what we are saying. So you need to explain things much more precisely, much more clearly, ensure that there is no confounding variable or there's no confounding construct that you're trying to explain. A good way, or for example, one of my papers, which is now under review, we tried to talk about Jugaad innovation. The first question that we were asked is what the heck does this mean? So we did one simple thing. We put in one table which explained how Jugaad is different from everything else, and that helped us. So they could understand what we are trying to say, right? So whenever you're trying to use any form of Indian philosophy or Indian thought or Indian theory, which exists, which can definitely enrich management literature, take stock of what you have done and try to explain it better. All right. Now, I am open for questions, and I hope I can answer as many questions as possible. One second. Let me stop this. Let me open my chat. Yes, Vivek. Can theory be built by just observing trends and facts from academic and grey literature? Nope. So theory is not about observing what is exactly what I was trying to say, right? It's not a laundry list of it's not a laundry list of references. You need to understand. Okay, so the problem generally, what I see in a lot of papers, or what a lot of reviewers and AEs also have spoken to me about, is A and B, A, B, C, D, E, F, G. It goes like that, right? A said so, B said so, and what did you say? The answer is I don't see what you said, right? And that is what theoretical contribution is. You need to say something. It can't be just I'm adding. Right? Okay. So if you are using a different theoretical lens to explain something from which has been explained using a different theory, you need to be very careful on how you use it. It is essentially what we talk about, what I was talking about in the paradoxes, using paradoxes, right? So if there is an A view and there's a B view and both are opposing, I try to find how both of them can be brought together. It's not impossible to do. You need to do it properly. Okay, Nitesh. Nitesh's question: while doing research, does one consciously look for creation, development of theory, or good question? So I learned this from a faculty at IIM Bangalore, who told me that every single paper that you read needs to be looked at as a template, right? And you will learn, but how you develop each section. So when you start looking at everything as a section, you will start realizing how theory development is done. What we call hypothesis development, right? You will realize that before hypothesis development, there is a whole section called literature review. which basically is, you know what, saying that I have read everything. This is what everybody is talking about. Now I am going to show you what is different. That is hypothesis development. If both of them are mixed together, it is not theory. It already exists, right? So that is how you. So one, yes, you have to read, and it is observable. You should look for templates, right? If I hope I answered your question. So, okay, if we add constructs to an Roma, your question is if we add constructs to an existing framework using a phenomena observed only, does it contribute? Okay. So, Roma, there are 2 points that you need to talk about here. I need to talk about here, right? So there is a concept that we call GAS, gas, right? Generalizable, accurate, and simple. Now, if it exists in a particular industry, that means it is not generalizable. That means you're talking about certain contingencies to this theory. Again, so if I'm just adding a construct, it is what? I also need to answer how. Why is it different? Why are you adding this construct? The second thing that you need to answer is, all right, now that I have how, why should it impact something? Why is it different in this particular industry? And then obviously that's where you answer when, where, why, right? When and where at least. So that's how you would actually, it would become a theoretical contribution if you are answering the question of what and how and why. So you need to go back. I don't know what theory you're talking about. So you would have to go back and try to answer what, how, and why. If you are able to answer this, then it works. Let me give you an example. A recent paper, I don't know if one of you wrote that paper or somebody else did. I had a recent paper about real estate in COVID times, and they used a new some kind of new construct and said this has not been done, and that's it, I'm testing it. But the argument that I gave them was this seems only applicable in this industry. So first you either explain how it fits into this broader scheme of things, or why only this specific industry, right? And they never got back, so I'm assuming but you need to answer these questions. All right, Nidhi, your question is how grounded theory applies in developing theory. Brilliant. Okay, so a large amount of my work is based around grounded theory. Grounded theory is used when you are exploring a phenomena where you have tried to use multiple theories, but multiple theories have failed to explain this phenomenon, or they are not able to explain this phenomena fully. Some might to a larger extent compared to others, right? That's generally when we use grounded theory. So if, again, like I said, if you use qualitative method, but you use qualitative method properly in the right way, right? That's when your grounded theory will add to theory by saying, hey, this phenomena, this theory doesn't hold, and this, so I'm either adding new variables to the existing theory, or I'm saying certain variables are different, or the process is different, or the mechanism is different. So that's how grounded theory would help. Okay, Anil, I'm a PhD candidate in finance. Like, how can I build a theory in this area? Economics and finance have tons of theories. Strategy folks might not like me for this, but RBV actually came from the work of Edith Penrose, who is an economist, right? There are tons of economics theories. I'm very sure I don't know too much about finance, sorry, but I know that there are economics theories. You can definitely contribute them. There's a huge area where behavior and economics is coming together, right? So we are using OB theories in economics. Again, that's a theoretical development in that case. I personally I have never sent a paper to an economics journal. though I read AER on and off, but I have never sent a paper to AER. So I'm not very sure what is the, what do you call it? What is the importance of theoretical contribution in AER? I can tell you if it is AMJ, AM, obviously ASQ, Org Science, HRM, JOM, JMS. For us, theoretical contribution. For us, theoretical contribution is everything. Unless there is a theoretical contribution or a clear theoretical contribution, I'm very sure it won't even go past the editor's desk. But can you build? Yeah, definitely. All right. Anurag is, if a PhD thesis is intended to develop a theory, okay, can it have a predefined hypothesis or research question? So generally, we never start off with a hypothesis. You always start off with a research question. Especially when you're trying to say that I want to develop a theory, you would never start off with a hypothesis. You would always start off with a research question. Like I mentioned earlier, right? Hypothesis is basically an assumption that has empirical support. If something doesn't have empirical support, you would always start off with a research question. I would strongly recommend that you read the work of, again, Andrew Van der Ven on how research questions are developed. To whether you are in OBHR or you're in some other area, AMJ about 10 years ago, I don't remember exactly, but there was a series of papers that they published, which was on how do you publish your work, which was on how do you write the introduction, how do you write the literature review, how do you write the conclusion, how do you methods, which will really help you make understand how to, you know, where does the research question come from. 1 plus 5, I don't know, I think is bringing new variables to prove same point. Nope. When you're talking about variable, I'm assuming you're talking about an operational definition. That's a method. That has nothing to do with theory. If you're trying to bring in a new theory, a new theoretical lens to explain a phenomena that has been explained by somebody else, then yes. But otherwise, just a new variable, no, absolutely not. Amulya, is finding a research gap must to reach a theoretical contribution? And no. Now, okay, this is what I had mentioned earlier, right? We run behind. Okay, I also started off running behind. Actually, running behind the research gap, right? Research gap, how do you identify? By reading 10,000 papers. You have to understand a couple of things. Every month, there are papers that are published. There is no way you're going to collect that, right? The second thing that I really see is when you talk about research gap, what are you talking about? Somebody has not studied something. Is that a research gap? No. I mean, that doesn't make a theoretical contribution. So that is generally not what is seen, right? Novelty. Okay, wait, I'll come to your second question, Amulya, in a bit. But generally what we talk about is there, am I spanning the boundary of a particular theory using certain contingencies, or am I showing that a theory doesn't hold in X context because of something, right? Whatever it might be. That is theoretical contribution. Is novelty and theoretical contribution one and the same? Absolutely not. Novelty is slightly different from theoretical contribution. Novelty can come from multiple reasons. It can come from an interesting motivation. It can come from a phenomena that has not been used, that has not been explained properly. It can come from something new. It can come from something unique, whatever it might be. Is scientific process, if I understand, I didn't quite understand. So your third question, Amulya, I'm assuming you mean, can I write a theoretical piece or a conceptual paper, and would that be considered as theoretical? So that is the whole AMR is based on non-empirical conceptual pieces. But if you read AMR papers, you will realize how difficult it is to create a conceptual, good theoretical paper. So yes, can you create, can you do theoretical contributions without empirical testing? Yes, they are called theoretical papers, right? Again, theoretical papers are not literature reviews. They are not meta-analysis. They are theoretical papers. You are trying to bring in a new theory or a new contribution to theory through a thought experiment. I would suggest that you read AMR, Academy of Management Review papers, which really talk. If you read a few of the classic AMR papers, you will realize how you make a theoretical contribution without actually doing empirics. But it is, again, I personally find it tough. Let me be honest with you. I'm not very, again, unfortunately, engineer, right? So come with a lot of baggage. So sometimes it has a problem.
I have one question. Like you said about the conceptual papers, like in AMR,
Conceptual, no, they are theoretical papers.
theoretical papers here. So can we categorize them, like whether they fall into quantitative or qualitative?
No. Hold on. No. So when you're talking about theoretical paper, there is no empirics involved. Absolutely no empirics involved.
There is can't we categorize them whether those those review papers are the quantitative or qualitative? Or
Amulya. A review paper and a theoretical paper are different.
Theoretical paper. Sorry, theoretical paper. I mean.
Okay, not to get confused. You cannot categorize them as quantitative or qualitative because there is no empirics.
Okay.
There is no empirics. That's why I'm saying read a couple of AMR papers. You will understand what I'm talking about. DB, I'm assuming strategy or yeah. So yeah, as I said, I tend to rub strategy people the wrong way, but yeah, never mind. Certain phenomena popular in developed countries and not in India. Yeah. Yes. So this is exactly, Pauline, this is exactly the problem that I see, right? So and so phenomena exists in the West. It doesn't exist in India, or it is new in India. I'm going to see it in India. Okay. If it holds, if the exact thing holds, then you have not made any theoretical paper, right? If there is a phenomena that is different in India, you use that as a basis to make a new theory. So go the other way around. If you use that phenomena study, do a grounded theory approach, then go the other way, yes. Or if you say that, hey, this theory exists, for example, in management education, education research, right? I understand that a lot of research happens in the West. And you basically say that I am going to use so-and-so theory, whatever that theory might be. It does not apply in the case of India because of X, Y, Z. That is not only what, how, then you explain why. Then it is a theoretical piece, right? When you try to explain a lot of, so let me give you an example. There are tons of papers that come in Journal of International Business Studies, which is which are based out of India, and we talk about EMMNEs, emerging market multinational companies, right? Which basically suggest use the entire focus of certain characteristics of India and say why it is different. For example, institutional voids, the whole argument of institutional voids on how business groups came into existence, etc., all comes from this concept of why so-and-so theory doesn't hold and why is that mechanism. That mechanism in this case is institutional voids. Or in strategy, a lot of work has been done around institutional voids with regards to diverse, related and unrelated diversification, right? So you do that. Kunjal, I will have to send out a list. So what I'm going to do is I will send a list of all the references and other resources that I've used to the RNP office, and they will send it. Okay. So Nitesh, the problem is there is no one way or one best way. Okay, I'm a very big believer of the term equifinity, equifinality, right? Which means there is no one path, all paths lead to the same goal kind of thing, right? And to be very honest, to be very honest with you, a lot of ideas come through disciplined imagination. Again, biases. As a engineer, disciplined imagination is much easier for me than creativity because I have something to go on. Yes, but to be very honest, if you are, there is something called AOM War Chest. There is something called theorizeit.org, which will help you understand what are different constructs, how to measure them, how do you do things. And there are resources now that are readily available. The way that I learned, right? I came in to my work with a research question in mind. I was not able to explain it. You will, as you grow older into a PhD system, you start favoring certain theories. And I can see Anupama also there, so she will agree that you start favoring certain theories over others. So I have my own pet theories, and somebody else will have their own pet theories. But generally that's what ends up happening, right? You will figure it out eventually, but reading is one way. All right, Abhijit. Using a concept from existing literature which is related but not used, can it? No, it can't. No, it can't. Look, if you're talking about a concept from existing literature which is related but not used in the study, are you talking about the operational variable or are you talking about the construct? If you're talking about a construct, it should have been used in some way or form, right? If it is just a variable that you're using, so I'll give you this example. Okay, there are too many papers that come with this. XYZ let's say 1, 2, 3, 4 studies have seen so and so impact on motivation, so and so's impact on motivation, so and so's impact on motivation. They have not seen one small niche thing's impact on motivation. I'm going to see that. That is not a theoretical contribution. Okay. These are the words of the previous AMJ editor, Jason Shaw, right? He basically told, when this question comes up, he basically told me on my face, if you send that paper saying that I'm looking at this niche area, the first question is why, and it is a description. Not in all journals. I'm talking about the top journals, right? So that's where the problems come in. So that is not really a theoretical. So Kiran's question is, most economics look at the firm like a black box. Yes, what happened was beyond the realms. Okay, so Vivek is trying to basically, okay, Vivek, Kiran, sorry, are you from the strategy area?
Yes, sir.
I assume that. So you're trying to defend your position. That's okay.
No,
you realize, right?
I draw our theories from organization theory,
kidding,
economics, and so I do not discount that fact. In fact, Uttar is economist.
Yeah. So
lot of our people
as an OT person who loves OT, I'm going to basically say, all of it comes from us, right? So it's just, leave that. Yeah, understand between theoretical and conceptual paper. Theoretical and conceptual paper is usually the same. I think you are getting confused between a review paper and a theoretical paper, right? So a review paper looks at all existing work in a particular area, and there are different ways of doing it. Some just assimilate it. Some say, some put it in some kind of categorized form. Some say, hey, people have not looked at, so I'm giving you something else. So for example, there is a very famous journal, Academy of Management Annals, which publishes papers that are reviews essentially, right? Now, AMR, which is Academy of Management Review, publishes papers that are theoretical. So theoretical papers are basically papers that use theory or multiple theories to explain or give you either a new theory or explain a phenomena or explain how certain phenomena can be seen from a specific lens, right? That is slightly different. Why is theory building better than application of existing theory on application of existing theory on neurespondence is not really theory building. So where is your theoretical contribution? When you, I don't know who is 1 plus 5, but when you basically send in a paper to a journal, the first thing you need to talk about is theoretical contribution. So and so theory is been seen in the West. I'm applying it in India. What's the theoretical contribution? Unless your results are extremely different from the existing theory, and you can explain why. Okay. So disciplined, I am assuming Ishita. Okay. Can you explain disciplined imagination? Right. Sure thing. So disciplined. So I'll give you my own example. So my whole thesis was around a phenomena where a certain group of hospitals is dying, but within that certain group of hospitals, some of them are doing extremely well and some of them are basically not doing so well, right? So I tried using population ecology, but it won't explain why some are doing well versus others are not. Then I tried using institutional theory, but then I realized that institutional theory is also not able to explain heterogeneity within a specific population. So I used institutional logics. Now, when you use institutional logics, this is basically the discipline. So I know that there are some guardrails of institutional logics which say these are the logics, these are the norms of each logic. And basically within this, I do my imagination to explain different things occurring and how things are changing. That is disciplined imagination. I would recommend reading Van der Waals paper, Andrew Van der Waals paper on disciplined imagination. Also, please have a look at papers that use different theories or theories from a different field and bring it in. Now, even if you're bringing it in, let me give you an example, because that's exactly what you asked for, right? So you know about, I'm assuming, okay, sorry if I'm wrong. So there is something called a theory of elasticity. When there is pressure applied, when force is applied to a certain object on both sides, opposing side forces, it starts stretching. At one point of time, this stretching increase. It's called plasticity. Basically, at that point of time, if I remove the pressures, it doesn't go back to its original shape. It comes to this new shape. If you continue increasing the pressure, it breaks. Right? The same concept has been used to organizations, and it's called organizational elasticity. When organizations sometimes face opposing goals, when you face opposing goals, they are being pulled. The organization is essentially being pulled apart in different directions. Now, if these go away, the organization may come back to its original form or it may not. Basically, that's the difference between an elastic object and a plastic object, right? That's how you would, so you know this from physics, you know the theory of elasticity from physics. Can you apply it to organizations? Yes, but it has to be disciplined. The guiding principles of the theory of elasticity will define this, right? Okay. How can we keep in touch with you? You can email me. As simple as that. Theory, concept, variable. Okay, Jagannath, I am going to do that. Yeah, Carl Weg, yes, but yes, Poole and Van der Waals paper, yes, right. As I mentioned earlier, I am a little bit of a fan of Andrew Van der Waals. Yes, Carl Weg also used this paper. I have in some way, I don't remember. But Carl Weg, Andrew Van der Waals, some of these guys have written really good papers. I am assuming I have answered most of your questions. Jagannath, your question, can you please, so what I'm going to do is share a list of all the papers or resources with the research and publication team, and they are going to basically publish it. Yeah, so actually, Kiran, thank you for that. The entire 1989 series in AMR is on theory development. Have a look at it. It's wonderfully done. A lot of it still holds. Anupama, you have a question?
Yes. Hi, Aditya. Thank you so
Hi,
much for the workshop and for all the insights. My question is pertaining to the case study bit, a method of using of building theory. And you said that you believe personally that multiple case studies are better. But I mean, if you could throw some light on, you are aware of my context, and just for the others, I'm doing a field level study or a category level study in the pharma industry. Now, I do only have a field to study, although there are probably different companies within. How can I, and specifically, how can we in general try and deepen theory using single case studies? Any inputs would be helpful.
Yeah. So, see, the beauty, so when Kathleen Eisenhardt's whole argument of multiple case study method, right, came from the fact that she was talking about her level of analysis was organization, or it could also be teams. When in sociology, when we talk about, essentially as a sociologist, we talk about fields, right, or a community per se.
Right.
So in which case a single case study is the only method, but it is not it is not how we talk about case studies in organizational settings. So when you talk about a case study in sociological settings, it is more of an anthropological case.
Okay.
It is much more intense. It is much more in depth. What we are trying to do is we are trying to build a whole story of the field.
Right.
Of how the field changed, or how the field moved, or what made the field change, right? Or we can use, so there are multiple ways. Ethnography is one of them, right? So sociologists generally use an ethnographic approach, but in management per se, right? One of the best papers I have read is by King, which is called the power of the pulpit, paper and the pulpit, which is I'll send you the paper, which is basically about how the civil rights movement in the US got impetus from churches and from the press. Okay, but not the main national press, from local press, right? And how they kind of mixed things together. And their entire time frame or their entire story is developed not using interviews, but by using articles.
Right.
So they use articles which basically show how things are changing, and then they make inferences from that. There's a very wonderful piece of work also in Journal of Marketing on how gambling got legitimate in the US.
Right. Okay.
Right. Which is, again, they have not used any interviews. They have used articles which are published freely available, and how the story has shifted, which is essentially a sociological method. So the case study in your case is not the case study that Kathleen Eisenhardt or somebody else is talking about.
Right.
Is that?
Right. I'm actually using similar methods as you're aware. So it's archival study. Right. The second question I had was, motivating the theory development that you were talking about. And I hope I'm not taking up time or others' questions. So when we do the literature review, like you said, a gap still needs to be motivated as to why it's important. Now, in the case of some nascent literature, let's say something which is 15, 20 years old, as in the case of categories literature, there are many factors that we know by observation of the phenomenon that have a bearing. but have not been dealt with in the literature, and have simply appeared in reviews saying these have not been looked at, like social factors, political factors. How do we, and this is where I personally struggle as to how do you motivate, it is important, it has a bearing. How do we motivate that?
So there are two ways of doing it, right? If you're talking about motivating, so for example, okay, in your context, you're not really motivating it by theory. You're saying that you're going to add to theory.
Right.
So what is important in your case is the phenomena itself.
Okay.
And so the way you would motivate it is by showing how this phenomena differs from anything that has been seen.
Okay.
And how it is an extremely different case. And because it is an extremely different case, you feel that it will enhance theory development.
Okay, got it.
Right?
So it's okay to use phenomenon-driven motivations to add to theory.
Right.
Okay.
But the end of it should be a theory contribution in general.
Got it. Okay.
Motivation is the first part, the hook.
Right.
But then, okay.
Thank you.
Abduction is a very different concept that Pavleen, to add, that AMD is really harping about, Academy of Management Discoveries, abduction theory. They're doing tons of workshop on it. I personally am not really very comfortable with how you can talk about it. Anyway, marketing theories, Nidhi, you should just read JMR. I think JMR has better theory in development than JM personally, because I've submitted in both the papers. I do know, but I think JMR does have really good theory development. Marketing, it talks about very good marketing theories. Marketing area. Right. So qualitative, again, like I mentioned, JM has some excellent qualitative work. Journal of Marketing. JMR also has some very excellent qualitative work with regards to marketing and how they are making marketing theory. To me, the king of marketing theory, if you talk about marketing strategy, is Rajan Varadarajan. I have had the fortune of having him as a friendly reviewer. I mean, one of the people who gives me feedback on some of my papers, and I mean, some of his work is extraordinary. So some of his work is excellent. Some of Raj, what's his name?
Sir, can you please write the name?
I forgot what Raj. He was the ISB dean. Suddenly, I've forgotten his name. His work is quite good. Jams, JMM, I'm not very sure. Jams is okay. Yeah, Rajan Varadarajan is okay. How do we develop theory, or how theory emerges? How do we develop theory? The first way of developing theory is by reading a lot of theory and trying to explain using a phenomena, either a phenomena or identifying an assumption in the theory that does not hold. Or which can be challenged. So some people really challenge theories based on assumptions. Others show how theories expand the boundaries of theory. It can be either one of those. Core sales and distribution. I am not very sure. Okay, so sales and distribution is a phenomenon or a function of marketing, right? So you're saying, is there any theory on sales and distribution? Is that what you're asking? If Chandresh, if that's what you're asking, then my next question would be, what in sales and distribution? Are you talking about motivating people in sales and distribution? Are you talking about, creating a supply chain of some form? So if there is specific this thing, more or less, again, is it marketing? If you're looking at it, you should look at some of the work that has been done in supply chain, if that is the case. Or if you can look at, if you're talking about motivating them through performance-based pay or something like that, there are tons of work on PFP, performance-based pay or things like that, right? Okay, supply chain related to pen. So there are lots of different versions to it. I can think of one version which one of my friends, Saurabh Bora, Amlesh, and Anirban work on, which is on they work on network theory. So network theory, they use network theory to see sales supply chain. So that is one way of looking at it. You can look at network theory, which is just general theory, right? You can look at some of the work they have done, so that will give you a better idea. But as far as I remember, they have used network theory in general because it's much more encompassing. Yeah, potentially you can use any lens, right? You can use agency theory, you can use stakeholder theory for you can use transaction cost economics if you want. But yeah, so you can use resource dependence theory also for all technical purposes. Anyways, so thank you everybody for joining. And before you go, I would like you to answer one more question. Now that we have talked so much about theory, now now what comes to your mind when you hear the word theory? So it's the same Menti if you have been using it. Okay,